Hello and welcome to the Alpha Anywhere demo and Q&A webcast. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Product Management here at Alpha Software, and I'm pleased to be joined today by Sarah Mitchell, our Director of Customer Success. Today, Sarah is going to be going into a topic which I think a lot of you are going to find really interesting. It just came out in terms of support in Alpha Anywhere, and it has to do with IndexedDB. So without any further ado, I'll let Sarah take it away.
Thank you. And can you hear me?
I can, and I can see your screen.
Awesome. Yeah. So last week we talked about what's new in Alpha Anywhere, and there was quite a bit of interest around IndexedDB. So I just wanted to, dedicate this entire session today about talking about this, what we're doing with it, what you can do with it now, and why. IndexedDB is a type of client-side data storage, like local storage, and you can use it in both web and mobile apps with Alpha Anywhere. So to kind of review, like client-side data storage, what is it? Why would you care? And client-side data storage is a place where you can write values to persist your application state, such as in cases of an app that needs to work offline. You can store things off there to make sure your app continues to function even if your network connection disappears. You can also use it to persist what you were doing. So if you leave the application and come back, the customer can pick up right where they left off. They don't have to sit there and try to remember where they were. And you can also use it to do things like download a significant amount of data for a quick lookup later. So an example of this in Alpha Anywhere is we have the client-side data cache, and you can put that data is all stored locally in the file system and in local storage in other places. And if you know in advance that you need to provide some sort of data lookup later, you can download that stuff on the back end when your app first launches, and then it's available when you need it. So you're not waiting for a callback to the server to fetch it. So client-side data storage is a very valuable tool in giving your apps quick perception of speed, like they're not slow, and also persisting your data so that people can use your app and leave and come back. You see this with our transform application. If someone's working on a form, we store that data locally in the mobile app using the file system, so that if someone's editing something and they leave the app and they come back and launch it again, they don't lose their work. And then in our transform central piece, which is the web app, we persist stuff to local storage, so it remembers what you were doing while you're working on things to save it. So I mentioned the local storage and file system. These are the traditional client-side storage options in your app. So local storage is a web browser thing, and it's available in your web and mobile apps, but it's extremely limited in what you can store in there. To compensate the needs of mobile applications, which may need to store lots of data in an offline environment, we added access to the file system. However, web apps can't access the file system to persist data. So this is really just a solution for mobile apps. And this third option that we're now introducing, called IndexedDB, works in both environments. Looking at mobile web applications, your storage options there right now, well, not right now. Right now you can do both, but prior to the last release, your only option to persist data was really just local storage, which is a key value storage system. It can only store string data. It is specific to your domain and protocol, the domain being www.mysite.com, that's a domain, and the protocol would be the HTTP or HTTPS portion of that URL. And the local storage is very specific to that domain and protocol. So if you have a domain that has two protocols, one using HTTP and one using HTTPS, those will have separate local storage buckets. You cannot access them across those boundaries. It's just one per domain. But local storage is also synchronous, which means it blocks the main thread whenever you do something with it. It does persist data for a long time, but people have had experiences where your data disappears in seemingly random situations, and we'll talk more about that later. And then perhaps the biggest drawback to local storage is you have a total limit of 5 megabytes of space. And if you look at local storage compared to what people were using before, which is cookies, which have significantly less space for which you can store stuff in. This is actually a big jump up. But when you look at things like building apps to replace capturing data in the field, or wanting to store a whole database perhaps of records to look up, 5 megabytes isn't much, and you can run out of it really quickly. Now, IndexedDB is like local storage in that it is also a key value store. It's actually considered a NoSQL storage system, though you cannot execute SQL queries on it. However, you can store any type of data in it. So with local storage, you store data, it gets converted to string. In IndexedDB, the data gets saved as the data type you put it in there, and that supports all data types in JavaScript. It is also specific to a domain and protocol. No one can access your IndexedDB data from another site, and you get your own bucket for your site. It is asynchronous, which means it doesn't block the main JavaScript thread. So if you save data off to it, maybe a lot of data, maybe a giant like megabyte PDF, that's going to go off and happen in a transaction, and it will let your app continue to run. It also persists data for a long time with more predictability, and you have significantly larger amount of storage space. The storage space that's available to you is going to be browser dependent, but it seems like most browsers out there give you at least 1 gigabyte. That storage space is restricted to what is available on the user's hard drive. So if the user only has 5 megabytes of space left on their hard drive, that's really all you're going to possibly have access to use. So that's something to keep in mind. But I know that Chrome will give you a lot more. Firefox seems to cap out at 2 gigabytes. So there's a lot more to work with. And when you look at jumping from 5 megabytes to 1 gigabyte or more, that's huge. That's a ton of space. I think most people wouldn't know what to do with that much right now. So when we looked at IndexedDB and we were like, why is IndexedDB coming in right now? It's like, well, it's a solution for offline storage for both web apps that also works in mobile apps and Alpha Anywhere. Cordova apps are run using, the name is escaping me, but it's basically emulating a website, web browser on the mobile device that your app runs in. So that's why you can use JavaScript and CSS and HTML to build your mobile apps with Cordova. IndexedDB is supported in that situation, as well as in your web apps. So now you have a storage solution that works in both environments. It's asynchronous, so it doesn't block your app, which is huge in some situations, because waiting for something to happen, if it takes too long, gives the perception that your app has locked up and stopped responding, and some people are unwilling to wait. So that's a good thing. The data deletion in IndexedDB is more predictable, and I've mentioned this a few times now. So when data is stored in these client-side storage systems in the browser, there are cases where the data will be deleted and there's nothing you can do about it. So in the case of local storage will get cleared out when a user deletes their browsing history, or deletes all their cookies, or the browser decides that it just needs to delete everything. So all those situations are different and random, and they're not consistent across different browsers. And in the case of mobile, it seems like in some cases, iPhone, iOS, or Android, I forget which, just decides to just clean it up. And there's nothing you can do to prevent it, and it's unpredictable. IndexedDB data can go away, and the situations in that are a little more concrete. I looked at Firefox, and in that case, your data will disappear in very specific situations. The user has explicitly deleted it. We can't prevent that. If the user wants to delete their 60 gigabytes of data that Google Chrome has somehow managed to occupy, and they don't understand why, there's nothing you do to stop that. They're going to remove it. But the data can also be deleted if you run out of space. So there's no more space to store anything, so it may choose to selectively delete things so you can add new things to it. It could also be deleted in a case where the IndexedDB database system has changed. It's been upgraded, and there's no upgrade path for your database, so the browser may choose to just wipe it out. But those are very predictable cases, so you know it's not just going to disappear if the user clears out their cookies. And then finally, why IndexedDB? We are looking at progressive web apps. It's something we talked about at DevCon this year, and this is something that gets used a lot when building progressive web applications. So these are the big reasons why. And in terms of support, IndexedDB is pretty widely supported. I took this screenshot from caniuse.com today, about 30 minutes ago. And this is just showing like where the support is. There's partial support in Internet Explorer 11. This is a note. I don't believe we really support Internet Explorer anymore with Alpha Anywhere. Microsoft has moved on to Edge. That's where we're focusing our efforts. So I would be surprised if they updated that to support it further, but I think it stops at 11 there. But if you look across the graph here, you see it's supported in Edge, Firefox, Chrome, Safari, Opera, Safari on iOS, the Android browser, Chrome for Android, Firefox for Android, Samsung Internet, browsers that I've not even heard of. So the support is wide, and it gets better all the time because this is something that's built into the W3C standard. It's IndexedDB is just part of those core of internet technologies that all browsers will support. So, all right, so let's talk about integration and where we're at. The last release, we added support for IndexedDB, and it's in UX components, and it currently only exists as a JavaScript API, and it has two forms. There's a form where you can pass in callback functions. So this speaks to the asynchronous, and we'll take a look at this, but you can pass in a callback, and depending on whether or not the request that you made to like get data, set data, or query some information about your data, if it succeeds, then we'll call one function. If it fails for some reason, then we call another. And then the second format that we have is promises. And I don't really want to get into promises today because that is an entire webinar in itself, but it is a subject I would like to cover because it's JavaScript technology where you ask for some data, some asynchronous operation, and then when that information comes back, then it executes more code, or you do something with it, and then there's like a catch to capture a fail state. And it's similar to the idea of passing in a callback function, except the syntax is a bit different. And it handles functions without names, anonymous functions. But we'll take a look at the callback thing today in a live demo. So this is build 7916, but the current release has all this stuff in it. So we'll make a new UX. And I was going to add a button in here. Click OK. Then I'm going to come down here and do its click event and open it up and go to text mode. So right now, this is where you're going to find IndexedDB integration. As we move forward with this technology, it's going to be integrated into a variety of places. It's going to become an option for where you can store your data offline in a list. It's going to become available in, I believe, the client-side data cache, basically pretty much anywhere where you can write to local storage or the file system. We are looking to add IndexedDB as that dropdown, so you don't have to do anything. It'll just work for you. So if you come into, you add a button, you come over to the text mode, or you come over here to JavaScript functions or client-side events, and you get into the JavaScript editor, you're going to find there's a button or a link somewhere, possibly inside a dropdown. It's going to be called insert component method, insert method. And in here, you're going to find the functions that we've added. So we have integrated IndexedDB, but we're giving you a subset of what you can do with it in these functions. So an example being, if you store data, we are restricting your key data type to be a string. IndexedDB spec says your keys can be of any data type, but we're kind of trying to get you to only use strings in our integration here. So we'll go through these methods today. There's a handful of them. If you click on some of them, you're going to see there's an alternate idbSetItem promise. This documentation isn't available for the premises yet, but it'll be there very, very soon. But all the documentation for these other methods is up and on the doc site right now. Actually, let's grab that link. There we go. All right, so here they are. I will paste this in the chat. You can start playing with them. But I just want to show you the basics of using these functions. So the first one you really want to know about is idb available. And what this does is it just checks your environment to make sure that IndexedDB is available to you. If it's not available to you, you don't want to use any of those other methods because they're not going to work. And this function just simply returns true or false. So if idb available, else. And then I'm just going to use some simple alerts. Oop. We'll save this. And we'll run it in working live preview here. And I believe we can run it in working preview as well. Both of these previews use Chrome, so here we go. IndexedDB is available in these environments, so you can test with this here. Look at working preview too, just to see how that stacks up, and it's also available here. So that's fantastic. So now you know use that. You can use these other methods, and we'll just quickly make a few examples. We'll add a button. Add key, we'll add value. Get value. Well, let's call it read value. Number of items. Oh, sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself. I need to add the button first before I can give it a name. So just to be safe, we're going to take this code right here and we're going to copy it and we're going to change our alerts to do something different. So we'll come over to add value, and just as a note, you can double click this to get in this editor, or you can click over here. It opens the click event. Paste that here. So if it's available, we would like to add a value. So with add value, you're going to do is set item is what you do to add a value. And when you add a value to IndexedDB, you have to specify two things. You have to specify the key or the item name. And this is, it's like the variable name of what holds the value. And then you can pass in a value. And the value can be anything. It can be a string, a number, a true false value, a date. It could be a whole JSON array. It can be a base64 encoded file. You can put really much anything in there. And including values undefined and null. This I pulled out of the just IndexedDB spec of what the data types are that is supported. So, but you can also pass in on success and on error. So these two functions are what gets called when the operation resolves, and you're going to see this for clear, delete item, get item, get keys, and length, as well as set item. And so the way this works is you request that we add an item at value to your IndexedDB database. And if that succeeds, we call your onSuccess function. And that gets passed in some information. If it fails, then you get an error. And failure in this case means something like an exception, or you tried to do something and it cannot be done because an error happened. Not that it failed to write your data for some, or in the case of GetItem, that's a better example. If you request a value and the key that you specify doesn't exist, it doesn't call an error. It just returns undefined, meaning that we looked for this value, but it didn't exist. So that's not an error. An error would be something like unhandled exception or variable not defined. So let's take this here and we'll just run this in here, in alpha here. So if IndexedDB is available, I would like to create a key value pair. It's called my key, and give it data for my key. And then on success, I would like to alert that my data was saved. And if it fails, data was not saved, and I would like to also know what that error was. So we can do this. Otherwise, IndexedDB is not available. So this is going to run, and it's not going to block. It's just, but it should add our value to our database. So if we run this, it's available. Data was saved. So our value is now in the database. So the next thing we can do is actually read that value out. So let's copy what that key value was. And come over here to read value. And ID available. So that's our key. So the next thing we want to do is look at how we would get that value back out, and that's with GetItem. So setItem adds the item, GetItem reads the item. And the only thing you need to that's different between the two is instead of passing the value that you're setting, you're just capturing that value in your onSuccess function to do your what you want to do with it. So, oh, I forgot to include key in here. There we go. So in this case, if we look up our key, it's going to call the OK function. It's going to give us that data that it found, and it's going to tell, we're going to alert that out here in this function that we've defined here. So it's available, add a value, because we hadn't added it yet. And then data value was data for my key. Remember, add value, we gave it my key, and the value was data for my key. Data for my key can be anything else that you want it to be. I mentioned that earlier. If you want to make an array, a JSON object, we could do that. We could do something like data for my key. And save that and run it again. So let's add the value or set the value because it may have already existed. And now it's data for my key. This gets translated into a string when it's outputted into the alert, but it does come back as an array. So GetItem. Now, if you ask for something that doesn't exist, you will get back an undefined value, but it will still succeed. And I just want to demonstrate that so you understand what I'm talking about. So if you read value, you get back null. It doesn't exist. There's nothing there, but it still succeeded. We didn't get an error message. So the last thing I just wanted to take a look at is just, how do you get a listing of what's in your IndexedDB? And you can do that with length. And then there's another method called GetKeys, which would just list every single key that's in your database. So I'm just going to grab this entire example here and plug it in. But this one, again, it's a function that takes an OK and an error function, but it doesn't return anything, and the data that you're going to get is just the number of items in your database, I believe. So right now there's 5 keys in there. Because this is all persisted locally. So, if you wanted to go in here and find out, well, what are those keys? You could do get keys instead. Get keys. We'll change this to keys. And these are the keys that are currently in there. So previously, last week, I was just experimenting with key types that I could put in there. So I put in a date. I put in some binary data. And this is my key was an array. So that's why there's 5 items in there. But that persisted from last week. So that's what you're getting with this. You can put all sorts of stuff in there. And then if you decide at some point you yourself want to clear out your database, we do have a method for that, and I'll add that right now here. It's called clear. And what clear does is it just deletes all the index database data in your index database, IndexedDB database. It doesn't affect anybody else. It doesn't affect your other apps. We'll save that. So there's our items now. If we clear it, all data has been deleted from our database. That's what was in my success function. So now if you go back and look at number of keys, there's nothing there. So that's where we're at right now with IndexedDB. There's a lot more coming down the line, but I would like to open it up to any questions anybody might have, as well as any questions about anything else that you might have a question about.
Excellent. So question, if you try to write the same key value, does it just overwrite what's there? In other words, if you, okay, that's...
It replaces it. That's why we've named it set as opposed to add. And maybe add value was a bit confusing, but yeah, I was thinking on the fly.
That makes sense. Also, another question is, does the data, how long does that data persist for again on the device? Not just the session length, right? It's until it runs out of space.
It's until it gets
or explicitly cleared.
Like on device, it's going to be there for a while.
Nice.
Yeah.
And can you delete items out of the database that you don't want there anymore? Let's say you want to take.
Yeah, you can. I didn't demonstrate that. Let's do that.
Oh, okay. Well, we could do that.
You can delete individual items.
Excellent.
You can delete all the items. Let's go grab read value. Just so I have the key and take a look at delete. I'm gonna just take these 3 lines are what I actually need to do the delete here. It was my key, wasn't it? Whoop. So here, for deleting an item, you give it the key you want to delete. If it exists, it'll delete it. If it doesn't exist, nothing needs to be deleted. Both are success cases. So what we'll do is we'll add my key. We will read my key. and then we'll delete it and we'll read it again. So we'll add the value, check its value, data from a key. We'll delete it, and then we'll read it again. It's null. So that's how you delete. Are you still there?
Yeah. So the
Okay.
next question, can this be used instead of session variables to store data?
Okay.
Probably yes,
Yes,
but
what are you storing? So keep in mind that data on the client is not secure. You got to assume it could be like somebody could get on that person's device and look it up. So it's not recommended that you store anything that's
or as a session
sensitive
variable
information. Yeah.
disappears
So,
at the end of the session. So just know that whatever data you're putting there, and maybe it doesn't make any difference. Maybe it's just like, what was the last record I looked at or something like that. But
yeah, if it's stuff
yeah.
like, what was the last
Yeah.
record you looked at, you could certainly persist that.
Yeah.
Keep in mind also, though, that if somebody opens up your app in multiple tabs or multiple browsers, that may be a situation where there are now 2 sessions available, and IndexedDB, at least within the browser, is shared across all those tabs.
Oh, I was wondering that. Okay, that's good to
Yeah.
know. Thanks.
Yeah. And it was another thing I wanted to sort of make clear. So IndexedDB stores data asynchronously. It doesn't block your app, but that data storage is also transactioned, so that when someone makes a request to save a bunch of stuff, that goes in a transaction and gets processed before it does the next thing. Because you could have 2 tabs open in a browser and submit 2 requests that both hit IndexedDB at the same time. So to prevent any sort of like collision that could cause corruption or lock up the system, everything gets transactioned and processed in order on IndexedDB. It doesn't block your app, but it does happen in the order it gets received.
Cool. I also noticed here on your slide you say progressive web apps. Is this technology, does it work only in a progressive web app, or is it one of the things that you happen to use in a progressive web
It's one of the things that gets used with progressive web apps, and yeah, for data storage and stuff like that.
Fantastic. Someone asked, can you please explain a little more what a progressive web app is?
So a progressive web app is an application that runs on a browser that has access to like hardware stuff. So in a regular web page, if you wanted to do something like access the user's accelerometer, like on a mobile phone, that probably you can't get to it. But with progressive web apps, they've actually built a whole API in the browsers that can communicate with that. So progressive web app would be able to access device hardware in some situations if it's there, and if it's not, it falls back to something else. And I believe that's, I understand how it works. If I've explained it totally wrong, somebody please let me know.
Excellent. We don't have a lot of questions. We do have one which is kind of involved, asking if you could demo a security framework, edit account for existing user using a list as the source of users and passing an argument to find the user record. I'd like to do some more stuff around security. I don't know that you're set up though to do it.
I'm not necessarily set up for that, but I do want to know if does this person know that there's we have another template. And it may not do what they want to, but there's this admin dialog, create users and assign roles. Open that up. And this actually uses lists to list users and their groups. So that might be a place to go take a peek to see if there's something there you can glean. Otherwise, send out the guides and we can investigate it a little bit more. We do have plans on our roadmap to redo and improve our templates for working with security. So that's something we're actively pursuing.
Also, the security genie, which builds out a framework for your application, including I think a tabbed UI at the end, and it gives you a login, and it sets you up with a lot of stuff. We're going
Yeah.
to add to that so that it also has an admin page built into that as well.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at. Yeah,
That's on the
that
roadmap,
new
yeah.
Genie currently only lets you do add, like, makes it really easy to add login
Yep,
and sign up, but what it doesn't
but
do,
it doesn't do
give you
admin yet.
an interface
Mhm.
to go and look who's signed up.
Yep,
And do things like reset their passwords or ban them, lock out their account so they can't log in anymore. So
exactly. Yep.
yeah.
Cool. Well, Sarah, it looks like we're out of questions. Is there anything else you'd like to cover? Or are we good?
No, but this might be the
Excellent.
shortest webinar ever.
I don't know about that. Anyway, if you do have questions, please send them into guides, GUIDES at alphasoftware.com. We'll be happy to get back to you. Sarah, thanks very much for presenting today. Thanks
You're
all
welcome.
of you for showing up. Hope to see you at our next Wednesday Alpha Anywhere demo and Q&A webcast. Until then, take care and stay well. Bye-bye.